Hi everyone, it's wonderful to be here. I'm Dr. Malilihan, and I'm really grateful to the members of the Faculty Development Committee for putting Coastal Scholars together. I've been on this committee before, so I know how much work goes into it. So I appreciate the chance to talk about and read some of my poetry. So for each of these poems, I'm going to read the poem. I'll give a little bit of context first, and then read through the poem and give just a little bit of a craft talk, so really miniature craft talk about some of the craft elements going on, but just a tiny thumbnail sketch per poem. We'll just sort of scratch the surface today together. Okay, so this first poem, Space Camp Moon View, was written remembering back when I went to space camp as a kid, and this idea of perspective shift with looking at the Earth for the first time, getting that photograph of the Earth for the first time, and then we were instructed to consider that. And when we were on this thing called the moon jump, where you literally would jump, I think it was 33 feet in the air, which would be the same as if you jumped on the moon because of the, there's less gravity on the moon. I believe it's 1/6 the amount. So at the end, when you hear me talking about squishing parents, that's, like I am squishing your head. Like as we jumped up, the parents who were arriving looked really small. They looked like stumps, and then like ants, they get smaller and smaller as you jump up. But when you come back down, they get large again. Space Camp Moon View, first published in Painted Bride Quarterly. Our workbook said the men who flew to the moon and saw our round, our perfect planet, blew faith in the vast black space of pupils, knew the shape of peace and wept. The blood monsoon and Nam poured through America's moon croon. My Lai, unknown to us, too far from view. Listen, the counselor said, the point is you, the future point of view. You'll grow up soon. Remember. When we jumped on the moon jump, we understood perspective shift. Below our giant feet, arriving parents, stumps, then ants. We didn't weep. We squished them, though they loomed back up with every earthbound thump. They asked us what we learned. We shrugged. Dunno. So this poem is actually a Petrarchan sonnet, also known as an Italian sonnet. So many people are familiar with the Shakespearean or the Elizabethan sonnets. And for those, so all sonnets have 14 lines. So you'll see this has 14 lines. But they have different organizations and different rhyme schemes depending on the type of sonnet. And there are some other Spenserians. But in a Shakespearean sonnet, which this is not, the rhyme scheme would be A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. And what am I saying, these random letters? I mean the final word for each line, the way that they would rhyme. A, B would mean the first line would rhyme with the third line, which is not the case here. So it would be moon, blue, monsoon, new if we had Shakespearean, but because I have Petrarchan, I have A, B, B, A. So moon, blue, new, monsoon. So moon and monsoon rhyme, blue and new rhyme. And in this case, I've actually made the sounds pretty similar anyway. So with Petrarchan, you've got A, B, B, A, C, D, E, C, D, E. The first set of four, so the two quatrains, so that's sets of 4 lines, A, B, B, A, those are always going to be that way pretty much in a Petrarchan sonnet. The final 6 lines, the sestet, CDE, CDE, sometimes that changes. There are variations. So it might be CD, CD, CD. It might be CDE, EDC. There can be different ways to do that. So I've got that rhyme scheme here. It's also, sonnets are in iambic pentameter, which the short version of that is there are 10 syllables, and we separate them into what we call poetic feet. So those are units of measurement of the rhythm. And so an iamb is an unaccented syllable followed by an accented syllable. So there are 2 syllables per foot. So iambic pentameter, you might notice pent 5. There are 5 feet or 5 sets of 2 syllables per line. But the idea here, it's not if I can get this exactly right where every line has 10 syllables and it's unaccented, accented, unaccented, accented, and so on. Yay, I did it right, and that's what I'm supposed to do, and now this is a great poem. That's not the point. The idea is to set expectations for the reader, so you'll hear that rhythm and you'll start to expect, oh, if I just heard an unaccented syllable, now I should hear an accented one. And we set up, we call it the metrical contract. We set up those expectations so that we can break them on purpose in meaningful ways that add additional meaning to the poem. So for example, in this first line, our workbook said the men who flew, you can hear that da 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 da. So I'm setting up this iambic pentameter, but here in the final foot, I have an anapestic substitution, which means instead of using an iamb, I'm using an anapest. An anapest has 2 unaccented syllables and then an accented syllable. So it actually adds an additional syllable to the line total. So this line has 11 syllables. Our workbook said the men who flew to the moon. Now the reason I did that is when you have 2 unaccented syllables right beside each other, it speeds the line a little bit. And so the idea of flying to the moon, you have to go really fast and cover distance really quickly. So though I added more distance to the line by adding the additional syllable, I did it with an unaccented syllable. So that adds that additional sense of distance while moving quickly that mirrors exactly what's happening in the content. So a couple of other things here. So in saw, around, our perfect planet, blue, and then here, faith. This is called an initial trochaic substitution. So usually at the beginning of the line is unaccented because it's unaccented, then accented. Our workbook said, and saw, around, the shape of peace. But here I start with an accented syllable. I use a trochee instead. So I've got an accented syllable followed by an unaccented syllable. So when I do that, that initial trochaic substitution, not only do I have a stressed syllable where I would not expect one, but you fall to it. So as you fall from one line to the next, it sort of adds extra oomph there. So this idea of the planet is perfect, it's round, it's blue, but then it's also blue faith. So I really wanted to emphasize that idea of faith and hopefully have readers come up with ideas like if you're the astronaut out there, you have to have faith that all of these systems that you've learned about are going to work, that you are going to be able to use your own knowledge and the knowledge of your team to literally stay alive out there. And then just the idea of, as humans, what can we turn to? We're in this vast black space. How do we hold on? What do we think about? And then particularly in the context of war is happening, and this is part of why the astronauts were so moved by seeing how perfect and even fragile the Earth looks in the vastness of space, and why are we ripping each other apart. So that really struck the astronauts. And so that's part of what I'm trying to do with the meter itself, is sort of emphasize that feeling. And then similarly, because we have that trochaic substitution, I end that foot with an unaccented syllable. Then I go into the expected iambic, the vast, but that puts those 2 unaccented syllables together again. So we have faith in the vast. We move quickly to vast. Then I have a spondaic substitution. I use a foot called a spondee, which that's 2 accented syllables side by side. So faith in the vast black space of pupils. So you notice there's a slowing down when you have these accented syllables one after the other, especially where you're not expecting it to happen. So the idea there is when we're looking at how vast space is, to just slow down and emphasize that feeling. And then, of course, we're not just in space itself, but the vast black space of pupils. So the idea is, sort of connecting ourselves, what we can see, and through that, what we can know. Literally, the astronauts are seeing this through their eyes. Their pupils are part of that. They knew the shape of peace and wept. And then that's the first time that we have a full pause. So we call it a caesura. And I wanted to break after wept so that that really sinks in. And then we shift to the blood, monsoon, and nam, because that's part of why they're weeping. Why are we at war when, as humans, we inhabit this planet together? Something else with sonnets, there's something called a volta, which is, so if you've got, let's go back to Shakespearean sonnet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, G. Every quatrain, so A, B, that's a set of 4 lines. C, D, that's a set of 4 lines. E, F, that's a set of 4 lines. Between each quatrain is like a little bit of a shift, maybe a different perspective on the same idea. And then that final couplet, GG, that's the first time you hear 2 sounds right beside each other at the ends of lines. So that really hits home. So before that final couplet, there's often a very big turn. And so that's called the volta. So like, you might set up one idea and then bam, you shift it and you have a very different idea. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Many people know that poem. At first, it seems like he's being really mean throughout, really critical. And then at the end, he says, and yet no one else could compare. This is true. This is actual love. So that shift, that and yet, that's the volta. In a Petrarchan sonnet, the shift happens after the octave and before the sestet. So after the first 8 lines, before the final 6 lines. So here, when we're discussing just what did we learn from the workbook, then the counselors are really emphasizing what it is we need to know. They're hoping that we'll take this in. And then this idea of remember, that's where we start to shift. So we have the volta, remember. So that's also part of why I made that its own, all by itself. There's a caesura here. It's like an entire sentence to just say remember, as we shift with the volta to now the kids are doing, the kids want to just go and do stuff. So we're like, yeah, okay, whatever, let's jump on this fun moon jump thing. And we sort of get it. We understood perspective shift, but we're using it very differently. We see these sources of authority, the parents are coming in, and we're just pretending to squish them. And then at the end, there's this, they asked us what we learned, we shrugged, don't know. So that's very kid-like, are we really going to take these lessons to heart? It maybe looks a little bit pessimistic, maybe we're not going to, but the fact that, these ideas have stuck with us at the same time undermines that doubt and shows maybe some of it will get through. Maybe we're not going to fix these big issues entirely, but something will carry through. Okay, so let's keep going. Grab a sip of water. This next poem is about being electrocuted and developing a chronic pain, a severe chronic pain disorder. I think that is one thing that you need to know. You also need to know that one way to help with is called CRPS, complex regional pain syndrome, also known as RSD, reflexive sympathetic dystrophy. There are many different possible modalities to try to manage the pain, and one is you can have a pump implanted where they actually drill a hole in your spine and put a catheter, and then the pump is in your abdomen, and the medication in the pump is derived from a synthetic sea snail venom that helps stop some of the pain signals. So I'm kind of playing with that idea here. Holding closed the body's gates to hell. A. My sister and I crouch to dig until the earth gives us something that moves. Look, an S she says at the writhing worm, and because I am a year older and must teach her, I pierce its body onto the hook. Look, a you, I say. Look, a you, she says. Copycat, copycat. The almost O of a snail goes slowly over roots as we cast and reel, while I, the big sister, the one in charge of the sandwiches, run inside for more mustard. Don't move. I don't see her lean to reach the snail. B. Somewhere where the sea shushes the shores of the Philippines, a Conus major snail harpoons a goby fish, reels its paralyzed body into its mouth. As the W of my sister's lungs begin to fill with water, Baldomero Toto Oliveira leans over a microscope at the University of Utah. While the ambulance swallows my sister and my parents scream for God to let her live, J. Michael McIntosh isolates the omega conotoxin in Conus majus venom. Days later, my sister is everyone's favorite talking miracle, and I am being punished, so I punch her in the mouth. C. 15 years later, I don't see the live wire until it punches me across the diner kitchen. My electrified nerves never stop writhing pain across synapses. Dear God, let me die, I cry, for the next 17 years. And this is why CRPS is called the suicide disease. You can't leave, my sister says. And I am sorry I ever told her. I wish you had died. While some doctors keep telling me, we're sorry, there's nothing we can do, other doctors are busy watching omega conotoxin hold closed N-type calcium channels. I should have explained those as well. Those are parts of the body that have to open for certain chemicals to go through in order for pain to be processed. Omega conotoxin hold closed N-type calcium channels, the body's gates to hell, the body's pain makers. After people I don't know let science into their spines, puke and fall and try again, and in this way care for me better than any lover ever could, the birth of a new drug, ziconotide. D. Now I am waiting for nurses to hook me up to back up breath and heartbeat, for surgeons to slice me open and drill through the bony S of my spine, to tunnel a catheter like a hungry worm through my body's roots into my abdomen, where they'll separate muscle from skin, open space for a titanium pump filled with copycat venom. I am waiting to wake when no line separates God from science, from this human body. I wait until someone with a face made of bright light takes me. So just a couple quick craft notes here. I established this idea of the S and the U and the copycat in the beginning. There's this just actual land snail that the kids are interested in. So that has echoes into later. It will be a Conus major snail. It'll be that venom that helps the speaker with pain. And it's really around the same time when they're still kids that the research is happening, and they'll learn how to isolate the omega conotoxin, so one part of that snail venom, to later create this medication that the speaker will end up needing. So that comes back at the end with the bony S of the spine, the body's roots. The land snail was going through roots. The copycat venom, because it's synthetic venom derived from, learning how omega conotoxin is, chemically created. So that idea of copycat, going back to the sisters, here where it says when no line separates God from science, this idea of all the science that went into this, but there's something perhaps divine as well. So literally the line drops to indicate that line between these two ideas, and then this human body is where they're going to join together, where we won't have to have this dichotomy between some sort of idea of God, religion, the divinity, and then the human body. Though this is not in a form, so there's not a particular rhyme scheme, I do use rhyme in places. So right here is where you see it the most. Someone with a face made of bright light takes me. So face and made, that's a slant rhyme. It doesn't fully rhyme, but you've got that assonance of those vowel sounds repeated. And then bright light. So right there we've got these near rhymes and then exact rhymes back to back to signify this idea of, you often think about the bright light people say they see with near-death experiences. There's the light of the operating room, the last thing you see before you go out. The idea of divinity, religion, God as light, and then takes me. So you go into whatever's about to happen next with the surgery, with the hopeful help with the pain condition, with, whatever this line between science and divinity is, will that line disappear? Okay, this next poem is a similar, it's has a character Jane, but it's a similar poem about the incident of getting this pain disorder. And this was first published in Reunion, the Dallas Review. Pain Jane. Once Jane's body was not coals and flames. Once Jane touched something she should not, a fire wire. That's when her synapses surged and crackled. That's when she plugged in her spinal cord, when brush fires first popped from her footsteps. Stop it, Jane said. Her parents said. The preacher said, stop it. The doctor said it won't. It won't, the doctor said. The doctor roasted a marshmallow. A joke, the doctor said. You will want to die. But don't, said her friends. Lie back, we'll have a barbecue. Jane's brain began to think the way fire thinks. Jane wanted to lick everyone. The state of California banned her, even when she got a water wife. She was an act of God. Min flipped down masks, calculated her heat input, welded things together. Jane tried to keep her sparks to herself, but her friends' arm hairs kept singeing into burnt hair smell. Health insurance had talked to fire insurance. Fire insurance had talked to health insurance. All the ears closed, fireproof doors. Stay home, the doctor said, but Jane would not stay home. Now that she was an eternal flame, she had to go to the graves, had to be the light, lighting the path between the breathing, the stopped. So a few craft notes about this piece. One of the biggest ones that's the most obvious, as you can see on the page, the line breaks, the lines are all over the place, and the idea behind that is to mimic the movement of fire and also the jerkiness. This pain disorder also impacts the muscles, and they'll see there's something called myoclonus, where muscles will just randomly jerk. Parts that you couldn't even on purpose control will move themselves, so it's sort of mimicking that sort of motion as well. And then there's that extended metaphor of the fire. It literally feels like being on fire, and a lot of people with CRPS say that. There's some other sensations as well, but that one's really common. So this character Jane, she could literally become the fire. So I wanted to just play with the different ideas. So the actual electricity coming through the wire that created the entire problem, I call the fire wire. And then it goes into the synapses. That's when they surge and crackle. It goes through the spinal cord. That's part of what caused the pain disorders, because it went through the nervous system in this way. And then the doctor's this first doctor's pretty flippant. It's not going to stop. And because she is literally fire, as far as the poem is saying, the doctor just roasts a marshmallow. And he's like, what? It's just a joke. Yeah, you're going to want to die. And then, but don't. So that drop down line makes it purposefully ambiguous. Does the doctor say but don't? Do her friends say but don't? Maybe both do. And then the friends try to make it positive, like, well, lie back, we can have a barbecue. And so her brain begins to think the way fire thinks. She wants to lick everyone, so like flames lick. So that's a little bit of a silly line, but also that idea that, you know, there could be some collateral damage to others. And then the state of California banned her, so because of the fire risk. But it's also that idea of now places become inaccessible, especially when you have an invisible disability, but also people with visible disabilities deal a lot with issues with access. So that's sort of starting to hint at that, and that's something that I deal with in other poems as well. There's this idea here, health insurance had talked to fire insurance had talked to health insurance, so you're just running around in circles, you can't get answers, and so the lines set that up with this reversal here. So you kind of go in a circle even in these lines. And then here at the end, there's this caesura that I add. So even though there's not a particular meter, so there's not an expectation to play against, you know, most of the time the lines are sort of winding, they're long, and then at times they get shorter to really focus. And then here at the end, even though she's being told by the doctor and by others to just stay home, which is something a lot of times people with disabilities will experience, people just want to kind of push you to the side. Instead of creating access, they want you to just sort of stay out of the way. But Jane refuses to do that. And then because she's an eternal flame, and oftentimes you'll see, you know, at memorials, you'll see them sometimes in cemeteries, this eternal flame. So she goes to the cemetery, she goes to the graves, and she wants to be the light, lighting the path between the breathing, the stopped. So there's this caesura, this pause that's literally in between the breathing and the stopped. And then bam, we're at the end. Once the breath stops, that's all there is. And so many different kinds of chronic illnesses and disabilities, you can feel like you're in this liminal space, this in-between space between being fully alive and being dead. And so since she's in this space between being fully alive and being dead, she wants to go, and since she is fire, well, why don't I use this for some sort of good? I can go to this place and light the path between the breathing, those who are still alive and those who are not, to try to help show the way. Okay, this was published in Typo magazine. Jane's armless arms. For every, oh thank God, door that opens on its own, 100 more trap Jane on the wrong side of where she needs to be. And there's never enough air anywhere for all the breathing she's got to get done. Her arms look like all the arms, lucky you, so no eyes stare until she can't push through. An inspiration push through. Liar, liar, arms on fire. Why don't you ask for help? Don't you ask for help? Her presence is a knocking, is a nuisance. Come in, the door's voices say, but the doors stay closed. So this one really deals even more with the idea of access. So here the speaker, her armless arms, even though she still has arms, they look the same as they looked before. Because of the pain, she's not able to use them the same way, and literally she's lost some functioning. But people say, well, lucky you, and that's partly because, you know, people with visible disabilities have an entire different set of stigmas that they have to deal with, assumptions people make because of how they look. People with invisible disabilities are often called liars, that they're lying about their situation. So that's where this comes in, liar, liar. And typically the phrase is pants on fire, but here it says arms on fire. And then her presence is a knocking, is a nuisance. Come in, the door's voices say, but the doors stay closed. So even though people say, hey, we have access, you're welcome here, they don't actually often change the environment in a way that becomes accessible. Similarly, why don't you ask for help? Don't you ask for help? That repetition, people will say, well, just ask for help if you need it, but the underlying message is you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't be in these spaces. So this poem is critiquing that. Okay, moving on. This poem was first published in Hunger Mountain. 13 black birds looking at Jane's. 1. The first 3 rosaries that ever were black, black for grief, for beauty, for burnt mustard seeds, and what the smoke released. Some say the thread snapped when God and Lucifer played tug of war, best 2 out of 3. Some say God never was. However, it happened when the beads scattered with the sound of every Jane clicking heels across marble-floored sanctuaries, a rush of wings, growth of eye sockets, of sharpened feet. Beads pupilled into eyes moved among the mountains. God said, "Let there be beaks." Lucifer said, "Let something bleed." Black blackbirds, colored blackbirds, and blackbirds unrelated to blackbirds sucked voices out of God's 3 minds. If the Janes knew how to listen, we'd hear God's thoughts in their calls. Conkree, okalee, chack, 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 ka, cheat, tit, 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 tisk, 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 chip, chaff, squee, wee, seep, seep, seep. 2. Not all black birds are black birds. The purple martin, the brown-headed cowbird, the yellow-headed blackbird, the red-winged blackbird, the yellow-winged blackbird, the red-breasted blackbird, the rusty blackbird, the tri-colored blackbird, the bronzed grackle. The fish crow does not look like a fish. The American crow does not look like a flag or a baseball. Poe lied too. Ravens say caw. 3. A raven named Nevermore did not fly out of Plutonian night. A raven named Never wanted more. Jane and the raven speaker both wanted more Lenore. 4 through 12. When Crow lived alone in the oak, Crow was happy for a crow. Then 8 cars came with windows full of crows. All the Janes cried, Crow went crazy. Crow didn't know each crow came from loose electrons vibrating Crow back out on equal angled light waves. No, Crow thought those other crows had to go, so Crow cracked windscreens, but every eye of every crow kept moving. Poor Crow cried all 27 crow cries. No magic. Every driver heard every crow land on every roof of every car, and Crow bent down to peck those upside-down crows while drivers looked for their dead. Crow didn't care what Athena said. Crow ripped rubber from wiper blades. Crow left his 3rd leg in the sun, so Crow made evening last all afternoon. Crow found his nest removed. When Crow whirled the 3 tenses together, when Crow edged the circle of cars cawing, when Crow made man and woman one in Egypt, when Crow stole sun, burnt feathers made moon, and when Crow flew from the southwest at sunset, the other crows did all of these with Crow. But when Crow flapped wings without flight, the other crows and their cars crashed together. The other crows broke apart like stars. Now Crow could live alone in the oak, happy for a crow. 13. Blackbird wore sheep's white cotton clothing, so the Janes thought he was a wolf. The boy who cried, cried. So a few brief notes on this poem. So the idea is, it's investigating where everything begins, this dichotomy between good and evil, how creation happens. God said, let there be beaks. Lucifer said, let something bleed. So things that are good are paired with some ominous aspect. And then, in the interest of time, I'm going to go a little bit more quickly. we have both wanted more Lenore, so it's a little bit silly there, that rhyme right beside each other, sort of to make it kind of fun. Then 4 through 12, that's a little joke. So instead of numbering every section, we're just going to throw a bunch together. And here there was a report about this town, I believe it was somewhere in England, where this poor crow saw its reflection in all of these different cars, and the cars were just being obliterated because the crow was attacking them. So that's what the crow doesn't realize it's its own reflection. And so then I also integrated a number of myths that have to do with crow, and that's just sort of, trying to explain, again, these larger ideas that the poem's dealing with, where things come from, looking at it from a few other perspectives. And as you notice here, one of the craft elements is every single line ends with the word crow. And there's the word crow in the middle of lines sometimes as well. And then we have this very short section at the very end. Blackbird wore sheep's white cotton clothing, so that James thought he was a wolf. The boy who cried, the Shira, cried. So you just repeat that word, cried. And then, of course, the entire poem is a reference to the Wallace Stevens poem, 13 Blackbirds. 13 ways of looking at a blackbird. Okay. Jane's hole in the wall diner. Snake backs flipping flapjacks, but Mama won't eat. Jane had to sink on down, invite worms to skin feast, to liver lunch. That's why. Jane already gave away her spleen. They're eating a hole in her heart beside the hole in her heart. Hunger hovers below ground like above. Hunger won't hush-a-bye, little baby, little heart hole. Hunger holds our feet to this earth walk, then let's go. Who knows where? Hunger's not there, though. Streets of gold, some say. No one's cold, some say. Lambs get bold, some say. The hunger left the lion, lest the good Lord's lion, lest this earth's the only ride. Let light be the answer to plant hunger, then let the plants be the answer. Let the cow have a stomach for every kind of hunger. Let the mother have a steak, the baby a breast. Let's tell her Jane sleeps. So I'll just point out one thing here. At the very end, we have this dropped line, Jane sleeps. So you can tell from the poem, Jane has died, but we're just going to say she sleeps. But you can see visually on the page, she's been buried. So now we're moving to some love poems, and we'll end with these. There are a number of poems that we won't have time to get to, but we'll end with some love poems. Consider the orange. The weight in your palm, the way your palm takes its shape. Consider the sound of the peel spiraling, our DNA, and the orange still present after the peel falls away. The release of juice anoints your weary tongue, drips down your arms. When you hold the orange to your mouth, it looks like prayer. Consider the seed inside the orange inside the seed inside the orange. When I hold you to my mouth, your dress spirals to the floor. Sunlight slants through the window a seed of the world outside, inside. Outside, water has gathered together after a rain. The roots of the orange tree pull until each orange swells with alchemy. Your shape weights my palms. Let me taste. Bless me, love, as we pull together, as we stay. So there are a number of things happening in this poem, but the most obvious is this is a concrete poem, so it looks like the orange. Duet for flute and voice. Something that you need to know here at the end, I mentioned a sine wave. The sound a flute makes can be mapped literally as a sine wave. You know, it goes, the hump is up and down and up and down. So that's, I'm referring to that visualization of the sound. Duet for flute and voice. Sometimes I am willing to believe you must be a god. Grass falls prostrate with each step. What would Whitman say? Dear Walt, you taught us with your mouth full of grass, and we are trying to listen, trying to live like life is enough. When you breathe, love, across the flute's empty spaces, sound is born where before there was nothing. I am listening. Don't worry, love. No other woman's sounds can ever fill my ears. My mouth is full of you. When I lie in the grass and listen, your flute's sine wave is a bowl rolling, rolling over, never empty. So we'll end there. Couple of small craft notes. What would Whitman say? So obviously that's Walt Whitman. We say Dear Walt right there. And then, you know, his famous work, Leaves of Grass. So you taught us with your mouth full of grass. That's a reference to that. But also he continues to teach us despite the fact that he's buried. So he's become grass, you can kind of assume. Or, you know, mouth full of grass is sort of a metaphor for death there. And then when you breathe across the flute's empty spaces, that's literally, you know, breathing across the opening in this flute is how that sound is created. So sound is born where before there was nothing. I am listening. My mouth is full of you. So that reference back to the mouth being full and this really loving image here. And then, like I said, that flute sine wave. So it's down, up, down. So you could, if you saw a bowl roll over and over and over, it would be open and then upside down and then open. So it's that idea of it rolling. So that sound just keeps going. The bowl is rolling, but it's never empty. It's always full. So thanks again to the members of the Faculty Development Committee. This was a lot of fun. I look forward to watching the videos and hearing the live keynote speaker. David Mulry will be doing the keynote, and I know that many different colleagues across many different fields will be part of this, so I can't wait to see what everybody else submits. Thanks.